Hi guys, welcome back. In the last class, we discussed what is blue-green deployment approach and how to deploy our applications into blue environment and green environment, how to make blue as a live environment and how to make green as a live environment. So practically we have implemented blue-green deployment concept for our application in the last session. Right? So first, we will deploy our application as blue pods with version v1. To expose the blue pods, we will create a live service. Live service will identify the pods by using version v1. End users will access our live service and blue pods will be executed. After that, we made a code update. We need to deploy the latest code. When we are deploying the latest code, customers should not face any problem. Our application should not have any downtime. So that's why when we are deploying the green pods, we don't touch the blue pods and we don't touch the live service. Once we have deployed green pods for testing purpose, we will create one pre-prod service. In the pre-prod service, we will expose green pods. Our testing team will access the pre-prod service and will test the latest code deployed is working as expected or not. If the latest code is working as expected, then we will route the traffic from blue pods to green pods. To route the traffic from blue pods to green pods, we are going to change the version of the pods in the live service. As of now, live service is exposing the pods which are having the version v1. Those are called blue pods. Now, once the testing is completed on the latest code, live service will use the version as v2. When the live service use the version as v2, the traffic will be diverted to green pods. So with zero downtime, we can deploy our application in the production with this blue-green deployment strategy. Are you guys able to follow me? Are you guys able to follow me? What is blue-green deployment concept? Yes, perfect. Now, today we are going to talk about another concept called config map and secrets. We are going to talk about another concept called config map and secrets in the Kubernetes. Right? Config map will be available and the secrets will be available. So this config map and the secrets are used to avoid hard-coded properties in the application. Now, in the last sessions, we have seen when we are deploying our application by using Docker Compose, some properties are hard-coded. Database properties are hard-coded in the application.properties file. So this is my Spring Boot MySQL Docker Compose application. In this project, we have seen that application.yml file is available. In this application.yml, we have configured driver class name, database URL, database username, and database password. So here, when you configure database properties like this, that is nothing but hard-coded properties. So tomorrow, if I want to change the database properties, tomorrow my application should run in the multiple environments. In every environment, the credentials will be different. Okay, guys. Now, for every application, multiple environments will be available. For every application, multiple environments will be available for testing purpose. Like we will be having a dev environment, we will be having sit environment, we will be having UAT environment, and we will be having pilot environment. So once the testing is completed, once application testing is completed in all the above environments, then it will be deployed into production environment. It will be deployed into production environment. Production environment is called as live environment. So in the real time, for every project, multiple environments will be available for testing purpose. Dev environment, sit environment, UAT environment, and pilot environment. Once application testing is completed in all the above environments, then it will be deployed into production environment. Production environment is called as live environment. For every environment, application properties will be different. Note, for every environment, application properties will change. Application properties will be different. So in our application, we are using database properties. So dev environment will have some database properties. Sit environment will have some database properties. UAT, pilot, production. Every environment to environment properties will be different. For every environment, application properties will be different, right? Database properties will be available and Kafka properties will be available for our application. Okay, Kafka properties will be available in our application. SMTP properties will be available in our application. Okay, and Redis properties will be available for our application, etc. In the project, database will be used, Kafka will be used, SMTP will be used, Redis cache will be used. So when we are dealing with these kind of components, environment to environment, the properties will be different. But currently in our application, what we are doing, we are hard coding the properties. So this is username is root, password is root. This is my database URL. So this properties will work only for dev environment. What about the sit environment? My sit environment properties are different. My UAT properties are different. My pilot properties are different. Once application testing is completed in these environments, then only we will deploy into production environment. So from environment to environment, application properties will be different. So here, what we need to do, we should not hard code. We should not hard code application properties. We should not hard code application properties. Currently, in our Spring Boot application, if you see, I have hard coded database properties. So I have hard coded database properties in my application. If I hard code the database properties in my application, those properties will work for only one environment, not for the other environments. When I want to deploy my application in the other environment, then I need to change those properties. I need to change those properties. So here, if you observe, we are having application.yml. In this YML file, I'm configuring my data source properties. What is the problem if I configure my data source properties like this? Can you tell me, guys? What is the problem if I configure my data source properties like this? The data source properties are hard-coded values. These properties will work for only one environment. But in the real time, our project will have multiple environments. Like dev environment will be available. So our application will be deployed into dev environment so that developers will test our application is working as expected or not. Once the developer testing is completed, our application will be deployed into SIT environment. SIT environment will be used by testers to test our application. After testers testing is completed, then our application will be deployed to UAT environment. UAT stands for user acceptance testing. Clients will test our application in the UAT environment. Once the client testing is completed, it will go to pilot environment, that is called pre-production environment. Once the pilot testing completed, then application will be deployed into production environment. Production environment is nothing but the live environment. Once application is deployed to the production, then end users will access that application. Once application is deployed into the production, then end users will access that application. Now here, as we are deploying our application into multiple environments, the database properties will change from environment to environment. Dev properties will be different, sit properties will be different, UAT properties will be different, production properties will be different. Kafka properties will be different from environment to environment. SMTP properties will be different from environment to environment. Redis cache properties will be different from environment to environment. So as the application is deploying into multiple environments, is it recommended to hard code the properties like this? Guys, is it recommended to hard code our database properties like this in the application.yml? If you hard code the properties like this, if you want to deploy into the SIT environment, you need to change these properties. You need to repackage your project. You need to recreate your image and you need to deploy. After deploying into the SIT, now I want to deploy to the UAT. To deploy to the UAT, again, I need to change the properties for UAT environment, repackage the project, recreate the image and redeploy the application. For example, I want to deploy to pilot environment. Again, change the properties, repackage the project, rebuild the Docker image and redeploy the application. So every time when you want to deploy the application, you need to change the properties. You need to repackage your application. You need to rebuild a Docker image. Then you need to create the deployment in the Kubernetes. So tell me here, hard coding the properties is recommended. Hard coding the properties is not recommended. Guys, hard coding the properties is recommended. Hard coding the properties are not recommended. Hard coding the properties are not recommended. Why hard coding the properties not recommended? We should not hard code application properties. We should not hard code application properties. If I hard code, what is the problem? If I hard code the properties, what is the problem? What is the problem if I hard code the properties, guys? Respond in the chat box. Your application will be tightly coupled with only one environment. If you want to deploy your application into other environments, then you need to change the properties and you need to package the project. You need to build the image and you need to deploy. We should not hard code application properties. Config map and secret. Config map and secret are used, secret concepts are used to avoid hard coding in application properties. Config map and secrets are used to avoid hard coded properties in the application. Are used to avoid hard coded properties in the application. So as of now, we are writing database properties directly in the application.yml. These are hard coded properties. Tomorrow, when I want to deploy my project into another environment, then I need to change the properties. I need to repackage my project. I need to rebuild the Docker image and I need to deploy. So this is not at all recommended. So here we are going to use a concept called config map and secret concepts are used to avoid hard-coded properties in our application. Now, config map is used to store the data in the form of key value. So any data that you want to represent in the key value format, config map is used to store data in key value format. Okay. Any non-confidential data that you want to use. Database driver class. Database driver class is not confidential. Database URL is not confidential. Username and password are confidential, right? So username, password, nobody should know. Driver class URL, people can see. I mean, our database team can see, our DevOps team can see the database driver class and URL. Any data which is not confidential, that data we are going to store in the config map. Config map is used to store data in the key value format. Config map is used to store non-confidential data. Config map is used to store the non-confidential data. Okay, guys. Now here, config map is going to decouple our application properties from our Docker images. Using config map allows us to decouple application properties from Docker images. Earlier, When I create a Docker image, my properties are also packaged in the Docker image. Now, I want to separate the properties and my Docker images. I want to loosely couple. I want to have loosely coupled application with the properties. Config map allows us to decouple application properties from the Docker images so that our application can be deployed. Our application can be deployed into any environment, without making any changes for our Docker image. Got it? Config map will make our Docker images are portable. Config map will make Docker images as portable. What is the meaning of a portable? You can deploy that Docker image in any environment without bothering about the properties. So what I will do is, currently what we are doing, our application is available, our application code is available, code plus properties are available. Code plus properties are available within our application. Then what we are doing, we are taking this project, we are packaging our project as a jar file or war file. So within the war file, my properties are available. Now, using this war file, we are creating a Docker image. Using this war file, we are creating a Docker image. That Docker image we are deploying into Kubernetes cluster. That Docker image is running in the Kubernetes cluster. This is what we are doing as of now. Okay. Our code is available and our properties are available within the GitHub, right? Application code available, application properties are available in the GitHub. Now, when I package my application, war file will be created. Inside that war file, code available plus properties available, database properties available. With this war file, I'm creating a Docker image. With this Docker image, I'm creating a pod in the Kubernetes cluster. With that Docker image, I'm deploying my application in the Kubernetes cluster as a pod. So pod is the smallest building block that we are running in our Kubernetes cluster. So to expose this pod, we are creating a service. So this is the pod, and this pod we are exposing to access outside by using service concept. By using service concept, we are exposing our pods. Are you guys clear with my point? Now, properties are available within the code. Then I created var, then I created image, then I deployed my image in the cluster. Now assume that my database credentials are changed. I want to deploy my code into SIT environment. For SIT environment, properties are different. Then what I need to do? I need to change the properties. Then again, I need to create the war file. And again, I need to create the Docker image. And again, I need to deploy my application. I want to change my properties. After changing the properties, create the war file, create the Docker image, and deploy the application. Now I want to deploy my project into UAT environment. Again, change the properties, create the war file, create the Docker image, deploy the Docker image to cluster. Now I want to go for a pilot environment. Again, change the properties, create a war file, create the Docker image, and deploy. So my Docker image can be deployed to any environment, or my Docker image having hard-coded properties. Guys, my Docker image is portable here, or my Docker image is not portable here. My Docker image is portable, or my Docker image is not portable. My Docker image is not portable. Why my Docker image is not portable here? My Docker image is having hard-coded properties. When I want to deploy in the other environment, I need to change the properties. I need to create the war file. I need to create the Docker image. Then only I need to deploy. Suppose if I want to deploy my project 20 times into different environments, then what I need to do? 20 times I need to change the properties. 20 times I need to package my project. 20 times I need to create the Docker image. 20 times I need to deploy. Is it recommended? Is it recommended, guys? It is not at all recommended. My application is tightly coupled with the properties. My Docker image is having hard-coded properties. My project is having hard-coded properties. In the WAR file, hard-coded properties available. In the Docker image, hard-coded properties are available. Easily, we cannot deploy this Docker image into multiple environments because environment to environment, database properties will be different. But in my project, we are having hard-coded properties. In my project, we are having hard-coded properties. Are you guys able to follow me? Now here, we should not hard-code the application properties. We should not hard-code the application properties, right? Config map and secret concepts are used to avoid hard-coded properties in the application. Config map is used to store the data in the key value format, that is non-confidential data. Config map allows us to decouple application properties from the Docker images so that our application can be deployed into any environment without making any changes for our Docker image. Config map will make Docker images as portable. What is the meaning of Docker image is portable? Guys, what is the meaning of Docker image is portable? Come on. What is the meaning of Docker image is portable? Without creating Docker image multiple times, same Docker image we can deploy into multiple environments. Same Docker image we can deploy into multiple environments. That is the meaning of a portable. Meaning of portable. So what we are going to do when we are going for config map, whatever the properties that are required for our application, those properties don't hard code. So these are called as environmental properties, right? Environment to environment, database properties will be different. So these are called as environment specific properties. Environment specific properties we are going to store in the config map. If it is a non-confidential data, we will go for the config map, and we can go for secrets if you have a confidential data. Username and password are called as confidential data. So to remove hard-coded username and password, we are going to use secret concept. Any non-confidential data like driver class and URL, those are non-confidential data. That data will be configured by using config map. Got it? Now, secret is also one of the Kubernetes resource. Secret is also one of the Kubernetes resource. Secret is used to store confidential data in key value format. Secret is used to store confidential data in key value format. Okay, guys. So example, password. So now in my properties, username is available, password is available, driver class available, URL available. Here, nobody should understand what is my database password. That is a confidential data. To store the confidential data, we will go for secret. And driver class URL username, that is okay. Anybody can see that. Now, so to store non-confidential data, we will go for the config map. To store confidential data, we will go for secret. Okay, guys. Using secrets, we are going to store confidential data in the encrypted format. Secret is used to store confidential data in encrypted format so that nobody can read it. Nobody can understand what is the original password. So any secret data that if you want to decouple from your application, then we will go for secret. Any non-confidential data, if you want to decouple from your application, then you will go for config map. Are you guys able to understand what is a config map and secret? For every application, multiple environments will be available for testing purpose. Dev, sit, UAT, pilot, production, etc. Once the application testing is completed in all the environments, then only it will go to production. Production is the live environment. So when we are deploying our application to multiple environments, environment to environment, some properties will be different. So as the properties are changing from environment to environment, we should not hard code. We should not hard code. We should not hard code application properties in the project. Okay. We should not hard code application properties. If we hard code application properties, then our applications are not portable. So we need to avoid hard coded properties in the application. How to avoid hard coded properties in the application? That's where config map and secret concepts are used in the Kubernetes to avoid hard coded properties. So what is the purpose of config map and secret? Config map is used to store the data in the key value format. So config map basically used to store non-confidential data. Config map allows us to decouple application properties from the Docker images so that our application can be deployed into any environment without making any changes for our Docker image. Config map will make Docker images as portable. Okay, config map and secret will make config map and secrets will make Docker images as portable. That means without changing the Docker image, we can deploy that image into multiple environments. So when we are deploying our application into multiple environments, then what about the properties? Now here in the GitHub, what we will do is we will keep our application in the GitHub, but in this application, we don't keep the properties. Remove that. Only code will be available in the GitHub. So earlier what we have done, earlier we kept code plus properties in the GitHub. So we packaged our application as a WAR file. In that WAR file, hard-coded properties are available. With that WAR file, we created a Docker image. In that image, hard-coded properties are available. That image we can deploy to only one environment. But now what we will do is we will remove these properties values from the application. Okay, only code will be available. Only code will be available. And here in this application, we have hard-coded properties. Hard-coded properties means fixed values. Hard-coded properties are available. Now in this environment, in this project, now what I will do is code plus dynamic properties I will keep. Code plus dynamic properties I will keep. So what is the meaning of dynamic properties? When you are deploying your application, then you need to supply the value for the properties. So earlier I have hard-coded properties. Hard-coded properties nothing but fixed value of the properties. Hard-coded properties nothing but fixed value is available. Now I want to remove that hard-coded properties and I want to keep the dynamic properties. Hard-coded properties nothing but fixed value. Dynamic properties means we can supply the values dynamically based on our requirement. Then with this dynamic properties, I will create my WAR file. With the dynamic properties, I will create my WAR file. With that WAR file, I'm going to create a Docker image. Now, in my application, hard-coded properties are available, dynamic properties are available. Guys, now in my application, hard-coded properties are available or dynamic properties are available. Dynamic properties are available. Dynamic properties are available. Now, I have created my Docker image. So in the Docker image, properties are available or properties are not available. In my Docker image, properties are available or properties are not available. Properties are not available. Earlier, in the application, properties are fixed. So they will connect with only one environment. But now I removed the properties, hard-coded values. I kept dynamic properties in my application. I packaged my WAR file and I packaged Docker image. So now my WAR file does not have any properties. My image does not have any properties. Now, when I want to deploy my Docker image as a pod, first I need to create a config map and I will create a secret. I will create a config map and I will create a secret here. Now in this config map, I will represent my properties in the form of key and value. And here I will create a secret in the Kubernetes. I will create a config map and I will create a secret. In the config map, I will specify what are the properties I need to run my application. I will create a config map and I will create a secret here. In the config map, my database driver class, URL, username available. Password I configured as a secret. Now here, I'm going to create the pod. When I'm creating the pod, my application should be created. For this pod, I will give config map as an input and I will give secret as an input. Now my pod will read the database data from the config map and secret and pod will be created. So now tomorrow I want to deploy my application into other environment. When I want to deploy my application into other environment, do I need to change my Docker image or I need to change only config map and secret? Guys, tomorrow here, earlier the properties are available within the project. Then we packaged the project as a var. Then we packaged it as a Docker image. Then we have deployed it. Within the Docker image, hard-coded properties are available that will run in only one environment. But today, what I will do is, I will remove hard-coded properties and I will keep dynamic properties. Dynamic properties means at the time of deployment, you need to supply the value for your application. With the dynamic properties, I have created a var file. With that var file, I created a Docker image. That a Docker image does not have any properties. So there is no database configuration in the Docker image. So when I'm deploying the Docker image as a pod, for the pod, I need to tell that was database driver class, URL, username available in the config map. You take the database values, non-confidential data from the config map. Database password is a confidential data. You take the database password from the secret. Using the config map and secret, we will supply values for the dynamic properties in the Docker image. So tomorrow, when I want to change my properties, when I want to configure other properties, I no need to touch my Docker image. I will change only config map and secret. That's it. So with this, what is the benefit? For every time, do I need to create the Docker image or Docker image will be created only once? I want to deploy into multiple environments. Do I need to build the Docker image every time by changing the properties, or I will change only config map and secret? I will change only config map and secret. In the config map and secret, I will configure the data in the form of key value and my application will take the properties from the config map and secret. So this is the benefit. Earlier, hard-coded properties, now dynamic properties. Earlier hard-coded properties now we are going for dynamic properties. Able to follow me? Are you guys able to follow me? What is the advantage with the config map and secrets? What is the advantage with the config map and secrets? Come on. What is the advantage with the config map and secrets? Our application will read environment specific properties from the config map and secret. Our Docker images are portable. Our Docker image can be deployed into any environment with this config map and secret approach. With the config map and secret approach. So it is damn sure interview question. How you will handle database properties in your application deployment. So we will never hard code application properties in the real time. In the real time, application properties will be maintained by using config map and secret. So when our application is deploying in the cluster, then environment properties will be supplied from the config map and secret. So our application is loosely coupled with the environment. When you want to deploy your application into multiple environments, you no need to change anything in the properties file or in the war file or in the image. Your Docker image is portable. The Docker image is portable. That a Docker image can be deployed into any environment. The only thing is when you are deploying to dev environment, configure dev properties in the config map and secrets. When you are deploying into UAT, config map secrets will be changed. When you are deploying to production, config map and secret will be changed. Docker image is portable. Docker image is loosely coupled with the application properties. Docker image is loosely coupled with the application properties. Earlier, we have hard-coded the properties in the project. Then Docker image is tightly coupled with only those properties. Now, I want to make it loosely coupled. To make my Docker image loosely coupled, we need to go for config map and secret concept. Are you guys able to follow me? Are you guys able to follow me? Come on. Right. Now, how to work with this config map and secret? Guys, do you understand when to go for config map and when to go for secret? Config map and secrets are used to avoid hard-coded properties in the application. Config map is used to store the data in the key value format. Secret is also one of the resource. It is also used to store the data in the key value format. Secret is used to store the confidential data in the encrypted format. Config map will store in the text format. We can read it. Anybody can read it. What is there in the config map? But when it comes to secret, it will store in the encrypted format for security purpose. So here, config map and secrets will make Docker images as portable. Without making any changes to the Docker image, we can deploy the image into multiple environments. Right. Now, working with the config map. Config map manifest file we need to create. Config map manifest. Config map manifest. I want to create config map manifest file. So to configure my database properties. So here also same thing. API version will be available. API version that is V1 and 3 dots for ending purpose, and kind will be available. Metadata will be available. Kind will be available. Metadata will be available. And for this, spec is not required. Kind, here I am going to specify that as a config map, and the metadata, here we are going to specify the name. So I'm specifying we Shopify DB config map, something like this. This is the name that I am giving for that. We Shopify DB config map, and labels I am giving. Labels. So here I'm giving the label as storage. We Shopify DB storage. We Shopify DB storage. Assume that we Shopify is the name of the application. We Shopify is the name of the application. API version is V1. Kind is a config map. Metadata, name I am giving, and labels I am giving. The label name I am giving as storage. We Shopify DB storage. And here, instead of specification, we will specify data. Data in the form of key value pair. Now that is DB driver name. DB driver name value. What is the database driver name? DB service name value. DB service name value we will specify. DB schema value, and DB port value. DB schema value and DB port value. What is our database port? DB port value. Like this, we are going to configure our database properties. So database driver name. So here driver class available. Copy this value and I will keep the value in my config map. Database schema, we Shopify app DB service. Here schema name I'm giving as SBMS. Here I'm going to give it as we Shopify application DB service. We Shopify application DB service, and this is the service name that I'm giving. We Shopify application DB service. Schema value, we Shopify app. That is a DB schema. DB port, that is a 3306. So like this, I'm giving this as a port number, database port value. So now this is my database port. This is my database schema. This is my database service name, and this is my database driver. So you see database driver is available, and database service MySQL DB hard coded. I removed that MySQL DB and I'm giving we Shopify app DB service, and the schema value. So SBMS is available. I removed that and I'm keeping we Shopify app. Port number is hard coded. The hard coded port number I'm changing. I'm adding as 3306. I'm adding this as a 3306. Now here database driver, database service, database schema, database port, I am configuring in the config map. I'm configuring in the config map. Now similarly, we need to go for secret also. Username and password is available. If I configure database username here, what is the problem? I can configure like this. Database username is root and the database password is root. So if I configure like this, what is the problem, guys? Anybody can see what is my database username and my database password. So actually these values are not confidential. Driver class, service, schema, port, not confidential. But database username and database password are the confidential data. So if you want to configure non-confidential data, then only we will go for config map. If you want to go for non-confidential data, then we will go for config map. Now, username and password are confidential details, so I will not go for config map. So confidential data, I will configure by using secret. Okay, guys. Now, let me go for secret manifest. So here also we are going to configure a manifest. We need to write the manifest here, start point and end point. So here also we will be having API version and kind will be available and metadata will be available. Instead of the spec, what we are going to specify? We are going to specify data. What data you want to represent in the key value that you write in the data. So in the config map also I'm doing the same thing. So below is the config map manifest YML. Below is the config map manifest YML. So in the Kubernetes, the concepts are completely based on the manifest YML files. So below is the secret manifest YML. Config map is used to store the data in the form of key value. This is the key and this is the value. This is the key, this is the value. So whatever the information that you want to supply for our application dynamically, that information we are configuring in the config map and secret. So earlier, database properties are hard coded here. Now I don't want to hard code. I want to pass the properties dynamically. So to pass the properties dynamically, I'm creating config map and secret. Inside the config map, we are going to configure non-confidential data. That is username and password is not configured in the config map. Coming to the secret, API version will be v1. Kind is a secret. I'm creating a secret. In the metadata, I'm going to configure the name in the metadata. So what is the name? We Shopify DB config secret I'm going to configure. Okay. So we Shopify is our project name. Assume that. We Shopify DB config secret. DB config secret. Labels, secret label we can give any label name. Labels. So that is secret is the label name. vShopify DB config secret. I'm giving as a label for that. Labels, sorry, here. Yeah. So this is the name of the secret and this is the label of the secret. What is the data? In the data, I'm going to specify DB username value. DB username value and DB password value. DB password value. Database username and database password. So database username and password, I need to configure in the encrypted format. I need to configure that in the encrypted format. So here we will be having base 64 encryption. Base 64 encodings will be available. Base 64 online encode, encode and decode. Now here type your data. I'm typing as a root and click on encode. When I click on encode, you see this is the value I am getting. So here I'm giving encode to base 64 format, base 64 encode.org. I'm giving root and I'm clicking on encode. This is the value I got. So this is my username and this is my password. Like this, we will configure secret data in the encoded format. So somebody will read the username. They don't understand what is username. So they read the password. They don't understand what is the password. So if you want to store data just like a text, we can go for config map. If you want to store confidential data, then we can go for the secret concept. In the secret, I'm storing my database username and database password value. From where I'm getting this value, I know my database username is root. My database password is also root. So I'm going for base 64 encode.org. Here I'm typing as root and here I'm clicking on encode. Then it is given me encoded value. That encoded value I am configuring in my secret. Encoded value I'm configuring in my secret. Are you guys clear? Are you guys clear? Now here, database username value, database password value, these keys are not fixed. These are my keys. These are my keys. So you can configure database username, database password like this also. Database username, database password. These keys are user-defined keys. When you go for data, these keys are user-defined keys, username and password. Got it. Same thing in the config map also. Whatever the keys I am writing, the key and value, these are user-defined. The key and value are user-defined. Are you clear with this? How to create a config map and how to create a secret? How to create a config map and how to create a secret? Are you able to understand this? Are you able to understand this? Now, let us go to here, our client machine. Let me delete everything available in the client machine. kubectl, delete all all the pods, all the deployments, all the services. I have deleted everything. So pod is deleted, service is deleted, deployment is also deleted. Now good. Now let me create the config map. Okay. vi db config map.yml. Okay. So in this YML, I need to configure my manifest, database manifest, config map manifest. Like this. API version, kind is config map, metadata, name, label. Data. In the data, I configured the key and value. In the data, I configured the key and value. Okay. Let us save this file and let us apply. So before that, kubectl get a config map. Now, do we have any config map related to our application? No, config map is not available. Let's create it. kubectl apply -f db config map.yml. So there is an error. V1 cannot be handled as a config map, cannot unmarshal the number into Go struct field config map data of type string. Let me edit this file. So any number which is available, it is not able to take that number. It wants the everything in the string format. So the numbers that you are configuring should keep in the double quotes. Save it. Now apply. Yes. So with this, config map is created. Whenever you have a number, it cannot take it. Everything it should take in the string format. So keep that number in the double quotes. So when you keep that number in the double quotes, my config map is created. Let us get the config map. kubectl get config map. Now you can see Shopify DB config map is created. So our properties are available in the config map. Our properties are available in the config map. So similarly, let us go for secret. kubectl get a secret. kubectl get secret. Currently, nothing is available here. vi db secret.yml. Insert mode. Now take the secret. Take the secret. Keep it. In the secret, I have username and password. So along with this data, we are going to specify what is the encoding technique we are using. OpaQ is the encoding technique we are using for this. Now, here, let me take this secret. Keep it here. API version v1, kind is the secret, metadata, name is available, labels are available. In the label, I'm giving secret, Shopify DB config secret, data, username value, password value, type as a OpaQ. Now, save this. Let us execute. kubectl apply -f, kubectl apply -f, db secret.yml. So with this, our secret is created. Let us get the secret. kubectl get secret. Now you can see Shopify config secret is created and kubectl get a config map. That is CG config map. Sorry. Config map. So whenever I execute kubectl get CM, I'm getting a config map. When I execute kubectl get secret, I'm getting the secret that I have created. So with this, my secret is created and my config map is also created. Okay. So with this, my database properties are created as a config map and secret. Now I need to deploy the database into Kubernetes cluster and I need to deploy my application into Kubernetes cluster. Are you guys able to follow me? How I am creating the config map and secret? So what are the database properties which we want to supply dynamically for our project? Those properties we are storing in the config map and secret. Config map is used to store non-confidential data and the secret is used to store confidential data. Config map is used to store non-confidential data and the secret is used to store confidential data. Okay, sir, I want to configure everything in the secret. I want to configure everything in the config map. That also we can do. That also we can do. Are you clear? Perfect. Config map and secret. Below is the manifest file for the config map. First of all, what is config map? Config map and secret concepts are used to avoid hard-coded properties in the application. Config map and secret concepts are used to avoid hard-coded properties in the application. Config map is used to store the data in the key value format. If your data is not confidential, then that data you can store in the config map. Config map allows us to decouple application properties from the Docker images so that our application can be deployed into any environment without making any changes for our Docker image. Secret is also one of the Kubernetes resource. Secret is used to store confidential data in the encrypted format. So it is used to store the data in the encrypted format. How I am doing the encryption? URL to encrypt. Here, if you want to encrypt your data, encode, URL to encode. Okay, guys. I can say encoded format. Now URL to encode. Using this URL, you can encode your username and password. Okay, guys. Now I am encoding my username and password by using this URL. So here, by using this config map and secrets, we are making our Docker images as portable. Using this config map and secrets, we are making our Docker images are portable. Now, my Docker image can run in any platform because I am not hard coding the properties. I'm taking dynamic properties. How to supply the dynamic properties to our application? Already we created a config map and secret. In the config map, some properties are available. In the secret, some properties are available. So non-confidential data I'm configuring in the config map. Secret confidential data I'm configuring in the secret. So config map, secret I will supply to my pod. So in the manifest file, I will read the data from the config map and secret. Based on the config map data and secret data, my application will be created. My container will be created. Container needs some properties because earlier in the code only properties are available. But now properties are removed from the application. Those are dynamic properties. When your container is creating, for the container, you need to supply the data from the config map and secret. Tomorrow, if you want to change from one environment to another environment, you will give another config map and secret, or you will change the config map and secret. You no need to modify your Docker image. Your Docker image is portable to read the environment data from the config map and secret. So how to create the config map and secret? So below is the manifest file. API version is v1. Kind is a config map, metadata, and a label. Data. This is important here. We are configuring our database properties in the key value file. Here, key is our choice, value is also our choice. So these are not fixed keys. These are my choice. So you can give just DB driver. That's it. No need to write like this also. You can write just DB driver, DB service, DB schema, DB port. Like that you can write it. Keys and values are user defined in the data section. In the data section, key and values are user defined. Once you have written this manifest YML, what you can do is go for kubectl, get a config map. What are the config maps available? It will display. Then you can go for kubectl apply -f here config map YML. Config map YML. After doing that, you can check it. Your config map is created or not. Okay. So this command you can use to check what all the config maps are created. This command you can use to create the config map with the above manifest YML. And once your config map is created, you can get the config map. And the next one, secret is available. Secret manifest. Below is the secret manifest YML. So now here I'm writing API version as v1. Kind is a secret, metadata, label. And data section is user defined. I'm configuring DB username value and DB password value. So this is not the original username, original password. Original username is root, original password is also root. I have encoded that username and password from particular URL. From this website, I have encoded my username and password. And encoding technique that we are using as a OPAQ technique. What is the base 64 encoding technique we are using to encode this value? By default, it is a OPAQ technique. OPAQ technique we are using to store our confidential data. Now, once you have this manifest YML, you can check kubectl get a secret. Any secret is available or not, right? After that, kubectl apply -f, kubectl apply -f secret YML. Whatever the secret YML you have, you execute that secret YML. Then after kubectl get secret. Initially, secret will not be available. We need to create our secret by using our manifest. If I execute kubectl get a config map, now I am getting my config map. I have created vShopify DB config map. Then I want to get my secret which I have created. kubectl get secret. kubectl get a secret. So whatever the secret I created with the type as a OPAQ. So now my config map is created, my secret is created. Config map is having database non-confidential data. Secret is having database username and password. Are you guys clear with my point? How I have created the config map and secret? Now you understand how to create a config map and secret. What are the properties you want to supply dynamically for your container, for your application? Those properties you need to configure in the config map and secret. Which properties we need to configure in the config map? Any data which is not confidential, that data you can configure as a key value like this in the data section. Any data which is confidential like username and password, which you want to supply for your application, you need to configure in the secret like username and password in this encoded format. Here in the data section, keys and values are user defined. So now once your config map YML is available, you can execute this command to create the config map. You can execute this command to see your config map. If you want to create a secret, you can execute this command to execute your secret. After executing, to check your secret is created or not, you can execute this command to check your secret is created or not. Yeah, namespaces also you can apply in the config map and secret. Here you can configure namespace also for the config map and secret. So now part 1 is completed. How to create the config map, how to create the secret. Now, how to read this data from the config map and secret, how to tell our pod to take the data from the config map and secret. That is the another challenging part. Guys, are you able to follow me? As of now, what we have done? As of now, we created the config map and we created the secret. Our application will take it automatically, or we need to tell the application to take the properties from config map and secret? Our application will take the properties automatically, or we need to tell to our application to take it? We need to tell our application to take this data. We need to tell the application. We need to tell to our application. We need to tell to our application to read this data from the config map and secret. We need to tell to our application to take this data from the config map and secret. Clear? We need to tell to our application to take this data from our config map and secret. Where we will tell that? Where we will tell that? In the manifest YML. In the manifest YML, we need to tell you take this data from the config map. You take the database username password from the secret. You take the database driver class, database service, database schema from the config. Guys, are you clear? What is config map and what is secret and how to create config map and secret in the Kubernetes? As of now, what is config map? What is secret? Why we need config map and secret? And how to create the config map and secret with the properties in the key value. Are you able to understand this? Are you able to understand this? Come on, guys. You got the clarity? Why we are going for config map and secret? How to create the config map and secret? Yeah. Now, what we need to do is, guys, see, I'm creating config map. I created a config map. Okay. And I created secret. I created config map and I created secret. In this config map and secret, Here, this is called my config map. And this is my secret. This is my config map and this is my secret. Now I want to deploy database in the cluster. Now I want to deploy MySQL database in the cluster. To deploy MySQL, I want to install MySQL database in the cluster. So to install MySQL database in the cluster, I need to tell, hey, MySQL database, you take the data from the config map and you take the data from the secret. When I'm installing the MySQL database, I need to choose what is my username, what is my password, what is my database service, and what is my database schema. So where all the database related configuration available now? Where all the database related configuration is available now? Database related configuration is available in the config map and in the secret. In the config map, what is available? In the config here, in the secret, what is available? In the secret, username is available and the password is available. What should be the username of the database? What should be the password of the database? That is available in the secret. What is there in the config map? Config map contains URL plus host details plus schema details. Host details nothing but service. Right? So here URL, service, schema plus port. So these are the details that are available in the config map. Only username and password is available in the secret. So URL, database driver, database service, database schema, database port, they are available in the config map. Username and password is available in the secret. With this config map and secret data, I want to set up database in the cluster. I want to set up MySQL database in the cluster. Okay. So I want to install MySQL database. For MySQL database, public image is available. Even in the Docker Compose also, we have used MySQL image and we installed MySQL database in the cluster. Similarly, now I want to install MySQL database in the Kubernetes cluster. When I'm installing MySQL database, I want to tell to MySQL database to take the username and password from my secret, to take the service name and schema port number from the config map. So that means I want to deploy MySQL database in the Kubernetes cluster. I want to deploy MySQL database in the Kubernetes cluster. Once MySQL database is ready, we know MySQL database username password from the secret. MySQL database will be installed in the cluster by taking the username and password from the secret, by taking the service name, schema, port number from the config map. Once this part is completed, then I need to deploy my application on the cluster. When I am deploying my application container, this is MySQL DB container. I want to deploy MySQL DB container. When I am deploying MySQL DB container, it has to take the credentials from the config map and secret, and it has to install the database with the given credentials in the secret and config map. Once it is done, now I want to deploy application container. That is a database container. Now I want to deploy application container. In order to deploy the application container, application should connect to the database. My application should connect to the database. So where the database credentials available? Am I going to hard code the credentials in the application, or my application also should read the data from the config map and secret? My application container should read the data from the config map and secret. My application container should take the data from the config map as well as from the secret, and my application container will be created. Once my application container is created, then my application container should connect with the database which is deployed in the Kubernetes cluster. My application container should connect with the database which is deployed in the Kubernetes cluster. To create the database, I'm using some properties from the config map and secret, and to run the application should connect with the database. So where the database properties are available? Database properties are available in the config map and secret. My application should read the config map data, secret data. My container also should read the config data and secret data. So in the tomorrow session, we are going to set up our application with the database. So here, what we need to do is first create a config map. We already completed. Create a config map. Then create a secret. We already done these two steps. Config map and secret is having the database properties. Non-confidential data is there in the config map. Confidential data is available in the secret. I have created that. Now deploy MySQL DB using config map and secret data. Deploy MySQL DB using config map and secret data. Test database is installed. Database container deploy MySQL DB container using config map and secret data. Test DB is deployed or not. Once DB is deployed, then deploy application. Once DB is deployed, then deploy application using deploy application by reading config map and secret data. By reading config map and secret data for DB properties. Deploy application by reading config map and secret data for DB properties. Test application container deployed or not. Test application. Test application deployment. So we need to set up one project in the Kubernetes cluster. For this project, I need a database and I need a application. So database will have some properties. Application should connect with the database. So here we are using config map and secret. What is the purpose of the config map and secret? To install the database, I need to choose my username and password. So that username and password, whatever I am choosing for the database installation, same username password required for my application. My application should connect with the database. So that's why that data, whatever the database properties are there, the database properties I will set up by using config map and secret. When I'm installing the database, my database container will read the config map and secret data and database will be installed. When my application is deploying, my application also will read the data from the config map and secret so that my application can connect to the database. So database credentials will be available in the config map and secret. At the time of installing the database, that config map and secret will be used to install the database. Once the database is installed, my application will be deployed. First, we need to deploy the database. So here, part 1, config map and secret creation, we completed. Then part 2, database deployment. Then part 3, application deployment. So tomorrow's session is damn important. Tomorrow we are going to see how to deploy a database with config map and secret, how to deploy the application with the config map and secret. So today you understood what is a config map secret and how to create config map and secret. So in the tomorrow session, we will deploy the database by reading the data from the config map and secret, and we will deploy the application by reading the data from the config map and secret. Someone is asking a question, why database should read the config map and secret? If database is not reading the config map and secret, then how you will set the username and password for the database? How application will know what is the database username and password? If you don't read the config map and secret for the database container creation, how you will set the database username and password? So if the database is taking some random username and password at the time of installation, if I don't use the config map and secret to deploy the database, then database will take some random username and random password. How your application will know what is the username and password? How your application can connect to the username with the database with that username and password? No. That's why when we are installing the database, we are choosing what should be the username of the database, what should be the password of the database from the config map and secret. By reading the data from the config map and secret, we will decide what should be my database username and password. So with that information, my database will be deployed in the cluster. Once my database deployed in the cluster, now I know what is the username and password for the database because that data I have taken from config map and secret. Same data my application also will take and my application will connect with the database. Got it? Config map is to store only plain data in the form of key value. That's why we don't go for encryption. If you have any secret data like username and password, only those details will encrypt. To store the encrypted data, we will go for secret. Config map will not support for encryption. Config map is used to configure only plain data. If you want to configure a plain data in the text format, then you will go for config map. If you want to store encrypted data, config map will not do that. You need to go for secret only. How to read the config map data, secret data, that is tomorrow's session. How to install MySQL database. While installing MySQL database, how to read the config map and secret, we'll discuss in the tomorrow class. Today concept, what are the problems with the hard-coded properties? If I hard-code the properties in my application, what are the challenges? Okay, how to make our images are loosely coupled? What is the config map and secret? How to create the config map and secret? Okay, so tomorrow, how to read the data from the config map and secret to install MySQL database? How to read the config map and secret to deploy our application? And how our application will be connected with the database? That we are going to learn in the tomorrow's class. Are you clear? Are you guys clear with this? So what is the problem if I hard code the properties like this? You see in the Docker Compose, I have used Spring Boot application. In the Spring Boot application, I configure data source properties. If I configure data source properties like this, then what is the problem? These are hard-coded properties. When I package and build a Docker image that will have hard-coded properties, it can connect with only one database. Okay. Tomorrow, when I want to change the database properties, I need to change properties. I need to create war file. I need to create a Docker image. So the Docker image can run in only one environment. So I don't like that approach. I want to make my image as loosely coupled with the properties. I want to make my Docker image as portable without changing the code, without creating the new image. My application should connect with multiple databases. So that's why in the code, instead of a hard-coded properties, we are going to keep dynamic properties. With the dynamic properties, we'll create a war file and we'll create a Docker image. Then the Docker image can deploy in the cluster as a pod, as a container. When I'm deploying my application as a container, my application is expecting some dynamic properties. The dynamic properties will be supplied from the config map and secret. That means my application container should read the environment data from the config map and secret. How to read it, that we will discuss in the tomorrow class. So today, what we are trying to do, we are creating a config map and we are creating a secret. What is config map? Config map is a Kubernetes resource which is used to store the data in the form of key value. So in the config map, we will store text data, key and value. Anybody can read it. And in the secret, confidential data, encoded data we will store by using secret. Config map and secret both are Kubernetes resources. Config map and secret are used to make our images are portable. So my application can connect with any database by reading the data from the config map and secret. My application will not have hard-coded properties. Now here, today, we created a config map with the database properties. We created a secret with the credentials of the database. Config map and secret I have created already. Now what I need to do is, I need to install MySQL database in the Kubernetes cluster. For that MySQL database, I will decide the username and password by using config map and secret. To install the database, I will read the database properties from the config map and secret, and I will install the database. So here, once the database installation is completed, then I will deploy my application. My application needs database properties. My application having dynamic properties. So for my application, I will supply the properties from the config map and secret. So here, database container should read the data from the config map and secret, and the database should be installed. Application container should read the data from the config map and secret, and application container should be created. Once the application container is created, application should be able to connect with the database container. So then our task will be completed. Clear, guys? So here, what is storage in the manifest file? Storage is just a label name, man. You can give the label as a ABC also. I'm not talking about any storage here. It is just a label name. I gave the name as a storage. That's it. You can give any name for that. It is just a label name. Config map manifest label name. Here label I have given as a secret. Here label I have given as a storage. It is just a label name. Good. Anyone having any questions can unmute your mic and you can ask.
Ashok, I have one quick question.
One by one, guys. One by one. Tell your name and ask your question.
Ashok, one question. Suppose as you described, config map and a secret. I want to know that is config name and secret has the some specific ID or name because we are creating on the cluster, right? What happened? It is exposed on the cluster level, or it will be can be exposed on the some specific namespace.
You can create the config map and secret by using a namespace also. If you want to group your DB container, your application container, your config map secret under one namespace, you can use a namespace also for that.
So in that situation, it will be not accessible from outside, right?
Outside the namespace, it will not be accessible.
Okay, got it. Yeah.
Ashok, even though if you are mentioning config map and secret values, if you keep stick to one environment, we might get differ based on the environment, the secret values.
DB dev config map secret will be different. Sit config map secret will be different, right? For every environment, one config map and one secret will be created.
Okay, every environment, okay, one file will be created. Okay, fine.
Yeah. For every environment, one config map and one secret will be available.
Ashok, in a secret. The question about the driver name that you added to the config map.
Yeah.
The driver name. Do you like doing to? I mean, I thought that this will be something which can change from one environment to other.
No, driver name
change?
will not change from one environment to another environment because we are using MySQL database. In all the environments, MySQL database only will be available. Environment to environment, schema will change and username password will change. Driver will not.
What is the?
You don't need to configure.
Externalizing. Okay.
You don't need to configure.
Okay.
I'm just showing you.
I understand the service. Okay. I understand the service name, schema, and port. Those can change. I got
those
it.
can change. Driver class will not change.
Sir, you also coded this username and password using RSA-265, right?
Yep.
And you were saying that we cannot, people cannot see it, right?
No. Here,
but if we know it is RSA-266, you can decode it also easily.
Listen to me, sir. Here I have given the base 64. In the projects, they will use their own algorithm, which other people don't know. Here it is a base 64. It is a universal algorithm. Anybody can understand that. So in the real time project, they will use their own algorithms to store the username and password. Got it? It is one technique. Base 64 is a basic universal.
It's just an example. Okay, I got it. Right. It is not a standard. So one last question. So namespace you were talking about yesterday, does that namespace is applicable in case of a config map and secret also?
In the config map and secret also, you can configure a namespace.
Okay.
There is config map and secret also can be binded to a namespace.
Okay. Thank you.
OPAQ is just a type of the secret, sir. What type of secret that we are using? It is a OPAQ. I will tell you what are the different types available for that. But OPAQ is one of the standard.
If we mention the type, then people will know the type of algorithm.
Sir, I'm getting two voices at a time, sir. I can't hear you. Can you please speak again?
Ashok Pradeep here. If we mention OPEC as type,
sir, why resound is coming for your voice, Pradeep? There is a resound from your voice. 2 times I'm getting your voice. Guys, are you feeling the same?
Yes.
Echo.
Yes. I think he's using mobile as well as laptop.
Oh, maybe that's the reason.
Now, sir, is it better now?
2 times I'm getting your voice, sir. Type your question in the chat. Echo is there. Type your question in the chat box. I will read it.
Ashok,
Hi,
I have a doubt on.
just I am unable to create cluster till now. Can I share my screen?
You are not able to create the cluster. What's your name?
Menaka.
Yeah, Menka, I will connect you at 2 o'clock and we will see that issue. Okay.
Ashok, in that I have a doubt on deployment. Yesterday we discussed like deployment supports auto scaling, but I think we have not done it, right?
Yeah, we have not done that yet. We'll do that.
Okay, thanks.
Ashok, am I audible?
Look, there is a DB schema, service name is there, right? I mean, are we going to create again service here with that name?
Yes, we'll create. The database service will be created with that name.
Hi, Ashok.
Tomorrow, when I deploy MySQL database, then you will get the clarity. What is schema, what is service, what is node, what is username, what is password.
Ashok, by 2 p.m.
Those will be changed environment to environment. That schema and port name, is it?
Schema, service and schema, username, password will change from environment to environment. Every environment will have its own config map and secret. Dev config map secret, city config map and secret, UAT config map and secret will be available.
Okay.
Yep.
Hi, Ashok. I will be in office. Will you be free after 7?
7 p.m. I will be free after 9 p.m.
9. Okay, sure. I will call you then. Otherwise, how will you be reaching?
Yeah, you can send me a message in the WhatsApp. I am admin in that group, right? I will remember. I will ping you.
Okay, sure. Thank you.
Yeah, Ashok. In microservices, we have config server. Okay, we using config server. We can create a config service to maintain the dynamic properties, the environment. How it is different from that here?
Sir, config server that is related to your microservices deployment. So whenever you want to change some properties, then you need to restart your config server, right?
No, not required. We can update dynamically from the
dynamically we can update the config server. So when we are going with Spring Boot related applications development, that config server can be used. When you go for other technology, so that config server may not be available. When we are having the Kubernetes specific deployments, then config map and secrets are recommended instead of that config server.
Okay, then if we are going with Spring Boot microservices, this is the best approach, or
this is the best approach? This is the best approach.
Even for microservice Spring Boot also.
Right.
Hi sir, Uttam here.
Yeah, hi.
We are using Amazon cluster, sir. My point is, when we are using that Minikube.
Do you want to practice on the Minikube?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, at the end I will tell you how to do that. But in the real time, we don't use it.
Okay, sir.
So this is the real-time standard, EKS cluster.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you, sir.
Hello, sir.
So if
Hello,
you
Ashok.
Minikube, can we create those load balancer and all that in Minikube?
Minikube is a single node cluster, sir. Just if you want to practice Kubernetes concept, load balancer will not support in that. Some of the concepts will not support in that Minikube. Minikube is just for freshers for practice purpose.
Right. Okay.
You can't practice all these things, load balancers and all, high availability, right? Multiple nodes. That is not there in the Minikube. It is just for practice.
Got it.
Hello, sir. Whenever you can use kube proxy for network purpose.
Internally, it is using, sir. Whenever you are deploying your application, I'm giving 5 pods. How the 5 pods are created in the 2 worker nodes? How the control plane is sending the request to the 2 worker nodes to create the pods? The control plane is connecting with the worker nodes. Internally, cluster communication is happening. Otherwise, your application will not be deployed. You don't work with the kube proxy directly. Your control plane and worker nodes will communicate with each other through network communication. That communication is provided by kube proxy only. Without kube proxy, we can't communicate with the cluster. We don't work with it directly, but cluster internally will use it.
Okay, sir. Got it.
Hello, sir.
Yeah.
Sir,
Hi.
in manifest file, you did not mention the spec, right? But
Spec is not in the spec is not required for the config map and secret. Instead of spec, we are configuring the data here.
Okay.
So if you go for deployment and service and all, spec is required. But for the config map and secret, what is the main purpose of config map and secret? To configure the data. So that's why we are configuring the data section. We are configuring the data in the form of username and in the form of key and value.
And sir, can we use the namespaces?
Yes, I told 3 times we can use the namespace. Yes, config map secret also can be used namespaces.
And match level also.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, Ashok.
Hello.
Yeah, I have created a blue deployment and green deployment as well yesterday. Okay. But in service manifest file of blue deployment, I give version as V2. But I have such the URL and it was not working. Actually,
Yeah,
individually it was working.
Sure, sir. We will do one thing. Tomorrow, once this application setup is completed, then one day I will conduct the class only for the doubts clarification. Then I will see that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Fine, guys. Good. Thank you. With this, I'm stopping for today. We'll meet in the tomorrow session. Tomorrow, we'll set up our application with the database using config map and secret. Thank you, guys.